Ladies and gentlemen, interment will be at Machpelah Cemetery. At the family's request, we will not be traveling in procession to the cemetery. Anyone wishing to attend the interment, at the conclusion of the service, return to your car, drive on your own to the cemetery, and we will allow ample time before continuing with the committal service. For the service of William Chaitman, no formal Shiva will be held. Following today's interment, friends are invited to a reception at the Kingsley Inn in Bloomfield Hills, 39475 Woodward Avenue. No religious services will be held. It is suggested for those of you who wish to further honor William's memory may do so by means of a contribution to Affirmations LGBTO and Community Center. We have this charity information on these printed out sheets, as well as directions to the Kingsley Inn, which you may obtain at the conclusion of the service. Thank you.
If Bill were here, he would stand up and tell you a grand story. You would be in the palm of his hand, and you would have to listen to him. He would absolutely take the opportunity to have a captured audience. Perhaps you would hear about his life. Perhaps you would think you were hearing about his life, but instead, you were really hearing about the life of the characters on All My Children. And there would be an energy here. It would be an energy that is very big and vast and fast, and an energy that uplifts us. And I'm so glad that you've already laughed together, because there would be an energy, like an energetic ball moving through the room. And you would know he was here. And my hope is that you will be able to feel him in you and take all the very best qualities from him. Above all, what I learned from Susie and Carol and Brandon, who have been quite a squad at this time, a true family within a family, is that what Bill wanted the most, where he really found his passion, where he really made his mark, was when he made people feel wonderful. And when you felt wonderful, he felt wonderful. And that was him at his best and at his happiest. So as you go forward and you carry your inner Bill, when someone tells you a story, especially one that seems a little exaggerated, 4 marriages, 3 divorces, they're on a cruise and she falls off the balcony, you'll say, "You're here." In Judaism, we sing from the book of Psalms to comfort the mourners. And my hope is that you'll hear this song and this psalm, and as our ancestors found the strength, the capacity to hold their losses and continue with their lives, so it is my hope that we will also find the capacity to have our losses and continue with our lives. This is Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters, restoring my soul, leading me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, because I dwell in your home forever. Adonai ro'i lo echsar b'neot desheyar b'tzeini almei menuchot yenaleini nafshi yeshovev yancheini b'magli tzedek leman shemo gam ki elech b'gei tzal mavet lo yirara ki ata imadi shivtecha umishantecha hema yanchamuni. There is a poem, it's called simply When I Die, and I think that Bill would very much agree with its message. It's written to you, it's in the first person. When I die, give what's left of me away to children and old people who wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother or sister walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known and loved. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live on in your eyes and not on your mind. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands, by letting bodies touch bodies, and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. And that is what we are tasked to do today, to give the love we feel for Bill and the love that he feels for us, because love is an energy, it's eternal, and it's here. And so it is such a privilege to invite forward Susie, Stephen, Brandon, and then Carol to talk about Bill.
My name is Susan Baranoff, formerly Susie Ginsburg, and Billy's dad, Abe Chaitman, and my mother, Rebecca Chaitman Ginsburg, were brother and sister, and very close. The Chaitmans lived in Mount Clemens, and we lived in Flint. And when I was about 5 and Billy was 6, we moved to Grand Blanc, so we were always about an hour apart, no more. And we did all the Jewish holidays together, sometimes at their house, sometimes at ours. And I loved going to the Chaitman's house for the exact same reason that my brother David over there hated going to the Chaitmans. It was loud and chaotic, and in our house, things were pretty civilized and very pleasant, and I was the only maniac. But at the Chaitmans, it was full of maniacs. And it was. And it was also the only place I ever felt comfortable staying overnight until I was like 12. Without being homesick, it was warm and comfortable. And for some of us who could tolerate chaos, it was a great place to be. And for me, that was mostly because of Billy. He was my first best friend and real playmate, because we shared so many things in common. We were as loud and chaotic as his mother. Well, not as, but we showed promise. And we shared things. We shared a love of animals, a deep love of animals, and as we grew, a real love of language, both of us. But most of all, we shared a love of all things sparkly, shimmering, like a kind of magic, shiny magic, glamour. And we wanted to wear it, to feel it, drape ourselves in it. We wanted to live in a shimmering, magical bubble. And you can't, not really. But some things let us come close. And for Billy, that was music. He was a very talented pianist as a young person. We had some serious musicians in our family, and they had their eye on Bill. And then when he was 14, he was diagnosed with it must have been a very severe form of scoliosis. And bone grafts were taken, a steel rod was inserted in his spine, and he had to lay flat on his back for the entire summer, in a full body cast, for the entire summer before his freshman year in high school. And, people didn't send kids to therapy back then, more's the pity. So we don't know what happened to Billy during that time, and I don't think Bill knew. But when that long, hot summer was over, Bill had changed. He stopped playing the piano, and I think he lost his connection to his own magic. He became a sort of Salieri who, more than anybody else, understood and appreciated the extraordinary talents of his contemporary Mozart, but he couldn't match those talents. But, and here's Billy, but whereas Salieri, or so the story goes, surrendered to bitterness and envy and lifelong disappointment, Billy did not. When he heard an amazing piece of music, you needed to stop what you were doing right then, right there, and hear it, listen to it, hear it with him. And with the same fullness and yearning that he felt. Now, maybe it was sleight of hand. Look over there, listen to this, just don't look at me. Or maybe it was really the thrill of, simply the thrill of those moments. But to people who were just meeting Bill or just getting to know him, it really didn't matter which it was. As a friend of mine said, Bill was too much. And for those of us who are too big for the room, and I think we know who we are, he was the poster boy for just letting it fly, you know. And so the condolences we've been receiving are filled with warmth and love and gratitude for the time they spent with Bill. And they use terms like a generous heart and compassion and frankly, I don't know if those phrases are true descriptions of Bill, but they are absolutely true for the people who wrote them. It's very likely that Bill's preternatural ability to charm and entertain strangers and friends alike was born out of shame and pain. It's possible. But I like to think it wasn't only that. I like to think that Bill took genuine pleasure in making people feel loved and understood and welcomed in a way that I don't think he ever fully succeeded in feeling himself. And that's also a kind of magic, isn't it?
Well, I'm not Stephen. For those of you, I'm Stevie. I grew up with Billy. My parents grew up with his parents in Mount Clemens, so we went back generations. And then we reconnected 5 years ago when he moved back to Michigan, and we had a lot of fun. I'm just going to read my prepared statements because I don't want to go off script. I might say something that might embarrass me and him. Just a second here. I can't see. How do you describe Billy, Will, or William? Billy remembered that we were in every grade school class and the name of all of our teachers. What a pair. We were the nightmare of every teacher that we ever had. We never shut up. We never stopped talking. We always got needs to improve in behavior. He was a friend, a brother, and the most unique person I have ever known. Our parents grew up together and made generations of memories, and that even included into their senior years when we used to go down to Florida every Christmas, because I was a teacher. We would spend every New Year's Eve with Aunt Reva and Uncle Abe, either at High Lie, which they loved, or at the early bird dinner. And I loved them. I never felt more comfortable than when I was at Billy's house. We were growing up. His parents owned a Howard Johnson's restaurant, and if you went downstairs into the basement and opened the freezer, it had tubs of Howard Johnson's ice cream and fried clams to die for. Maybe I shouldn't say that at a funeral, but it was true. We always loved to raid the freezer. In high school, Billy and I were lucky enough to be in the production of The Music Man for our high school operetta. He played Mayor Shin, and I played his wife, Eulogy McKechnie Shin. And in that role, I became Billy's first and only wife. And I'll always be proud of that. He was my friend, my brother, my accomplice, and funny as hell. There was also a side of Billy that I did not know. Growing up in the 50s and 60s made life difficult for Billy to be who he needed to be. He had to hide his true self to protect his true being. For that, I will always be sad. Moving to California gave him more freedom to live his life as he chose, but it didn't really change the man he had become. I know that life for Billy was not easy. Even though we lost touch once he moved to California, we reconnected back in Michigan as if no time had passed. Billy reached out to many of our high school friends, and bonds were reestablished. Most people can't go back, but Billy did, and created a circle of old friends and new ones. The first time that we got together after he moved back to Michigan, he turned to me and said, "You know, I'm gay." And I said, "That wasn't a very well-kept secret." And then we moved on. Billy and I were each other's beards, sidekicks and fellow adventurers. When I needed a plus one, he was there. He accompanied me to casinos, even though he didn't know how to gamble, movies, dinners, shopping, and helped me with craft shows. I used to be a crafter, and so he would come with me and help sell my jewelry. He called me to wish me happy anniversary 2 years ago, even though that marriage had ended more than 40 years ago. That was this terrific memory that I said, "You're calling me for my first marriage?" He said, "Well, yeah, isn't today the day?" I went, "Yeah, but who's celebrating?" Billy was a character like no one else. He was funny, unfiltered, totally spontaneous, and sometimes very unpredictable. Sometimes he was amazed at the simplest things. He was a knower of people, a feeler of emotions, and always a wit. He was an original. Billy had a remarkable memory, and we had long, gossipy, fun conversations about the people in our past. Billy was the brother I never had. Billy knew that it never mattered to me who he loved. Billy was Billy. I always wanted him to find happiness and contentment in his life. I'm so glad that Billy came home in the end, and that we all got to know him and love him more. Billy will always be in my heart and soul. He will never be gone, and I will never forget the bonds that held us together. I will carry him in my heart forever. May his memory be a blessing for us all.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Brandon Goodell. I am Bill's nephew. Let me pull up my notes here. Thank you for your patience. You know, if you had asked Bill why he moved back to Michigan from LA, he would have told you unhesitatingly, "If I die in LA, nobody's going to care." And here we are. It's never really easy leaving the comfort of your home to go mourn somebody else's loss, so I really want to thank everybody for coming here. Or mourning your own loss, mourning a loss. We're here to celebrate Bill, Uncle Bill, or Billy, or Will, if he really, really liked you. It's really easy to tell really happy and delightful stories about Bill, where he'd just charm a crowd of people, and he'd be literally the coolest dude in the room, storming into a party fashionably late, mid-rant, already explaining why he's late and what exactly he would like to do to the people who kept him from arriving on time. The story would be big and dramatic, and a little magical and unbelievable, usually because it was embellished. And it might end with a slightly sadistic joke. All of us have a really ridiculous and funny story about Bill, like his insistence that the best additive to scrambled eggs was French vanilla ice cream. It's more complicated to tell an honest story about somebody. Bill was always looking for ways to improve himself. He was convinced that he had the capacity to be fit and attractive and muscular, a strong bear of a dude. And he thought of himself as somebody who was perfectly capable of supporting his friends through thick and thin, and who doesn't get mad for petty reasons, and requires no medication, and only requires healthy meals and dietary supplements like vitamins, fish oil. And he had a vision of his own ideal self that almost everybody in this room shares, right? We all like to think of ourselves as, oh, if only I just start going running and lifting tomorrow. 1 year from today, I will be able to lift a car over my head. Radiohead, one of my favorite bands, wrote an entire song about this phenomenon. And even though I don't think that Bill would have really enjoyed this song, the lyrics kind of fit. Fitter, happier, more productive, comfortable. Regular exercise at the gym 3 days a week. At ease, eating well, no more microwave dinners or saturated fats. A patient, better driver, sleeping well, with no bad dreams, no paranoia, careful to all animals. Keep in contact with old friends, take them out for a drink every now and then. Will frequently check credit cards at a moral bank. No longer afraid of the dark or midday shadows. Nothing so ridiculously teenage and desperate, nothing so childish, at a better pace. Slower, more calculated, an empowered and informed member of society. Pragmatism, not idealism. We can look at this under a light where it's a totally understandable and pretty normal vision for oneself. I prefer to think of Bill's vision of his own ideal self from the same point of view as my own vision of my own ideal self, entirely possible and right around the corner. But to me, it's hard to look at this except under a more sad sort of light. Here we are trying to honor and remember Bill, and what we've done is identify that Bill had sort of deluded himself. He really liked the idea that we could get rich quick or that we could get effortlessly healthy, ignoring modern medicine, thinking about yesterday and tomorrow instead of only thinking about yesterday and tomorrow instead of now. And a juicer is all that he would need. A face cream filled with diamond dust. Raise your hand if Bill ever gave you a little thing of face cream with diamond dust. I'm curious. Okay, because he had a lot of it. He had a more than slightly sadistic sense of humor when he was in a bad mood, but that didn't mean that that was who he was deep down. He was more than just a little, but not little more than childish. He was a big kid. Because these things are all matters of sidestepping the work it takes to get healthy, sidestepping the difficulty of compassion, because compassion really only matters when it's difficult. No one wants to really speak ill of the dead, but to speak about Bill was to speak about a person whose beauty and his flaws, his sadism and his compassion were in a good balance with each other, at least by the end, I think. Like a good bonsai tree that looks ancient. By the way, bonsai means a potted plant. That's all that means in Japanese. But a good bonsai tree, there's two schools of thought about how bonsais are formed. One school of thought believes that the potter is training the tree, and there's another school of thought that the potter is rescuing the tree so that you can preserve its beauty. A rescued bonsai may bear scars from which it's been rehabilitated, but the potter is training the bonsai to bear its scars with grace and dignity. An educated bonsai may be mutilated by the potter taught how to bear its scars And I kind of think that Bill was trained into his scars more than he was rescued from them. These aren't mutually exclusive ideas, obviously. Somebody can be both rescued from the dark parts of their lives and also trained to respond to those things. A tree can be viewed under either light, and although I think that either context really applies to Bill, he was a damaged guy, and he bore his scars with as much grace as he could. And he found himself trained into those scars. But, there's another art it's actually from, bonsai is from China, but this art, kintsugi, is from Japan. And it's the art of fixing a broken pot with gold. It's intended to glorify the metaphor that we're more beautiful with our flaws, to highlight them with a bright, shiny gold lightning bolt right across the surface of the pot. Bill was little, if not flawed, but according to the philosophy of kintsugi, that means he was little, if not beautiful. During the slideshow that we had up earlier, at the very end of the slideshow, before it loops again to the beginning, there's this point where Bill is waving goodbye at his bar mitzvah party. He's like, all right, the party's over, I'm out of here. And then the next shot is this haunting and kind of sad photograph of Bill where he's looking over the camera. He's not even aware that a photograph was being taken, and he would be upset if he knew that this photograph had been taken of him because it shows a depth of sadness and pain on his face that you don't see in all those photos of him being photogenic, because he was photogenic. Sorry, my phone died. I think that photograph is the most honest and beautiful photo of Bill. I hope that other people think of that photo when they think of Bill, even if you've only seen it once. Like a good bonsai or a good kintsugi pot, you have to be able to see the scars, to see the beauty of things. And Bill maybe wouldn't have approved of the picture. But if we just acknowledge how fun Bill was and how much of a good time he gave us, that's not presenting the whole picture of who Bill was. He was not able to be himself for most of his life. He couldn't share who he was with so many people. He couldn't share it with his parents. He couldn't share it with his sister. He couldn't share it with his cousins. He didn't share it with me. But just like there's a balance in a nice bonsai tree, and just like there's the gold keeping the broken kintsugi pots together, I hope that everybody remembers Bill as a beautiful man. Thank you.
My name's Carol King. I've known Bill since my first year in college as a freshman. Mark Twain said, "You meet people who forget you. You forget people you meet. But sometimes you meet those people you can't forget. Those are your friends." And that was Bill. In Kalamazoo, Michigan, we attended Western Michigan University. At that time, this is a long time ago, there was a girls' dorm and a boys' dorm. And between those two was a cafeteria where we would all meet and hang out and tell stories and complain about the food, of course. Bill complained about the food a lot. But we formed groups, and that group was together through our freshman year. And then, as soon as we could, we moved out of the dorm. We wanted freedom. The girls had a curfew. We were locked in at night. The boys were running around like maniacs, having panty raids. I mean, it was just insane. So we moved into apartments, and we all lived within close proximity to each other. So we were always hanging out at someone's apartment, watching TV, watching movies, writing our papers, discussing the big problems of the world, philosophy and Vietnam, and what are we going to do about race relation, all of these things. And of course, we were smoking, drinking, and just generally joking around, and in some cases, coupling up. And so we were always circling around each other. And Bill and I were English majors. So we shared some profound feelings about literature and art. And we were both huge fans of the theater of the absurd. If you remember that, Waiting for Godot, or Godot, depending on where you're coming from. And Edward Albee, we especially loved The American Family with Edward Albee. We used to talk about, if you remember the play, the beige hat that the salesperson said, no, it's wheat. But Mother thought it was really beige, but her husband thought it was white. So we would go on and on about this, and we thought we were so very clever. As only, self-impressed young college students can be. But we'd do all that, and then we'd discuss E.E. Cummings' poetry. Not the substance of it, not the content, not the craziness of its construction. We were both outraged about the misuse of grammar and punctuation. We were offended by it. We read the great American novels. We discussed them, we trashed some, we wrote papers about them, we argued about the best, the worst, the mediocre. And when it came time for us to write our term papers, Bill was the typist. Bill had a real functioning typewriter that plugged in. I mean, it was a miracle. And because he was a pianist, his fingers were a blur as he turned our sloppy, scribbled handwriting into perfect, error-free papers, footnotes and all. Perfection. If they had graded us on that, we probably all would have graduated summa cum laude. We studied film, political science, history, and we grudgingly took the required courses in math and science and humanities. But lest you get the impression that we were budding intellectuals, let me set the record straight. Bill, fact about Bill. He scheduled his classes around his favorite soap operas. It may be a class he was dying to take, but if the class took place while General Hospital was on, forget about it. He was addicted to these soap operas, and he'd regale us, as the rabbi said, he'd regale us with these convoluted stories. And I remember one time sitting in my apartment as Bill told me this crazy story about some woman, Vicky, whose twin sister she thought was dead, had come back to visit her, and she wanted to take over her. It was so convoluted. And all of these stories would be, and I figured that one out. I figured that was a soap opera. But he would tell tales of babies being switched at birth. It would be a woman who developed amnesia, or a husband who had been long thought dead, returned and wanted to resume his family life. It was all these stories, a lot of, hidden pregnancies, fake pregnancies, pregnancies where nobody knew, somebody went away, and then a baby came back looking for them years later. A lot of stuff about pregnancies, apparently, in these soap operas. But this was what he'd talk about, and he talked about them as if they were his friends. So you'd hear about Luke and Laura and Vicky, and but that was part of his charm, and it was a lifelong addiction for him. After we graduated from college, he had one of the first VCRs I ever saw. And he accumulated a collection of VHS tapes that would be the envy of a library, if they were interested in that kind of thing. I don't know. He only reluctantly got rid of those VHS tapes after he had converted every one of them into a DVD. So he had more. He had more junk. At this point, I should remind you that this was still the 60s. And the earthly pleasures of drugs, sex, and rock and roll was not lost on us. Although in Bill's case, it was more drugs, sex, and show tunes. But we were eager to participate in that culture, and we did. My future activism began to take shape when I was a college student at Western. I was taking classes in race relations, attending lectures on the women's movement, getting tear gas, protesting the war, demonstrating for civil rights, taking over the admin building when Martin Luther King was assassinated. Just this, I was always running off to these things. Bill was watching soap operas, typing term papers, and he wasn't very political. I never quite understood why he wouldn't go with me to these things, but it was his choice, obviously. He was very interested and supportive, and he thought, yeah, you go. We got to do something. We got to take care of it. Go for it. And on some level, I knew Bill was gay. On some level. But I very much different from Bill. I grew up in a Catholic family. I went to a Catholic school for 12 years and lived to tell about it. And also to reject it fully. So I didn't know anything about homosexuals. It was just a word I'd heard. So, I sort of knew. And it was kind of nice because Bill was my friend. There was no tension. He never hit on me, which was fine with me. We never talked about those kinds of things. We were friends. And actually, I know Bill didn't come out to a lot of people. He came out to me after we'd graduated, and he was living in California. And he was very nervous. Very nervous. He didn't know how I was going to react, which is sad. But when he sat me down and he said, I have something to tell you. And he said, I'm gay. And I said, I know. And he was surprised. He was surprised. And as Stevie said, it was not the best kept secret. But in Bill's mind, it was. And I was surprised that he was surprised. I thought, well, of course, everybody knew. And as my involvement in feminist activism grew, I talked to him about lesbian and gay issues. That's before it was LGBTQA+, lesbian and gay issues. And I try to get him to open up a little bit about it and be concerned, get involved politically. This is your future. This is you. This is all about your rights. And he really wasn't ready for it. He wasn't ready to acknowledge it openly. He was safe in the closet and a little too comfortable, I think. But that wasn't my choice to make for him. He'd make insulting remarks about men who were what he considered too effeminate. He'd comment on their clothes or gestures or their manner of speaking and as if he were offended by it. But he did have one friend who was a drag queen. He loved him. But he also wasn't femme when he wasn't in drag. So I guess that, very complicated. He was judgmental about people. He deemed overweight, unattractive, too loud, too showy, too butch, too gay. He was just judgmental. And I try to talk to him about it, and that was Bill. That was Bill. And we finally started talking seriously about these things during the HIV/AIDS epidemic, when Bill was living in California and his friends were dying at an alarming rate, as we know, happened during that time. I lived in fear for him. I would talk to him on a regular basis, and I remember one time saying to him, Bill, are you playing safe? Are you taking care? And he assured me that he was. And then about, I don't know if it was months or a year later, he called me because he had been exposed, and he was waiting for test results. And I made him promise that the minute he found out, he would call me. And when that phone rang and he told me he was negative, I burst into tears. I was so relieved. But I never quite got over that concern about him. That worry. Because as we all know, he wasn't the healthiest guy. So it wasn't just HIV/AIDS. There were a panoply of other issues that could have gotten him, and eventually did. I don't think Bill ever completely stepped out of the closet. I think acceptance of his gayness came late in life. And it was an act of bravery for him to join the senior coffee clutch and the men's group. And I know how much pleasure he got and how much he enjoyed the community. It was something I'd always wanted for him. I encouraged him to get involved in affirmations before I moved to California. And he didn't want it, he was just not ready. He had to be ready. He had to do it in his own way, in his own time. And when he finally did, he was thrilled. He was so happy. He appreciated you people and reconnecting with his old friends from Mount Clemens and with Cindy. And I worried when he moved back from California. He was part of my community, and I really felt a loss. And I was worried that he was just going to like hole up in his apartment and sit at his computer, and I used to tease him about being a mole because he never had lights in his apartments. It was always dark. I would come to stay with him, and I'd say, Bill, how am I going to see what's in my suitcase? You don't even have a light in this room. But he enjoyed that. But when he moved back to Michigan and reconnected and found this new community, I was just so relieved. He'd made the right decision. I have to tell you, I have so many stories about Bill, over 50 years worth, about our road trip from LA to DC that we called our Little Chill, about his ridiculous self-diagnoses. I mean, at various times, Bill had narcolepsy, Asperger's, ADD, ADHD, OCD, and the call to the drug hotline when we were in college to get their advice on whether or not he should take mescaline with his friends. And when he fell asleep during a performance of Stomp, the loudest musical in the world. If you could, I mean, it was just pounding noise, and he was sound asleep next to me. I will tell you about his uterus and when he killed Bambi. So ask me at the reception. I can tell you some stories, and I want to hear yours because I know you have some great stories about Bill too. We were close friends through all these years, through thick and thin, whether we lived in the same state or across the country. We were BFFs before there was such a thing. We invented it, I think. But Bill Chaitman could be exasperating, aggravating, argumentative, hysterical, ridiculous, but never, ever boring. He was flawed, but he was magnificent. I'd like to offer one final gesture of appreciation for Bill that I think is apropos. Please join me in a standing ovation for one of those people you can't forget, Bill Chaitman. He would love that. Thank you.
Thank you for your depth of knowledge and love and honesty and caring and devotion. William David Chaitman, Vevel ben Avram Verivka, will be remembered by his beloved friend Carol, his cousin Sarah, David, Sandy, his nephew, Brandon, his cousin Susan, by his dog Nico, his friend Stevie. It's a bird? A bird made the obituary. I assumed it was a dog. Wow, okay. I read cockatoo. Well, Nico will remember Bill and friends Stevie and Cindy, and in the beloved memory of his parents, Abe and Reva, and his sister Bonnie. And so if you would all please stand. There's a song that I'd like to play for you as the pallbearers come forward. And it's a song that Susan is singing. And it's a perfect way to say thanks for the memory.
Yes, we traveled far and wide together. Did we travel too fast? Now I reminisce and wonder whether any good things ever last. But that, my dear, is past.
We need 3 more pallbearers. Would anybody like to volunteer?
Thanks for the memory
Sure.
of candlelight and wine, castles on the Rhine, the Parthenon and moments on the Hudson River line.
We need 2 more. We're so sorry.
How lovely it was. It's for the memory of rainy afternoons, swinging Harlem tunes, and motor trips, and burning lips, and burning toasted prunes. How lovely it was. Many's the time we feasted, and many's the time we fasted. Well, it was, while it lasted, we did have fun, and no harm done, and thanks for the memory of sunburns at the shore, nights in Singapore. You might have been a headache, but you never were a bore. I thank you so much. We said goodbye with a high bar, and I got as high as a feeble. But we were intelligent people. No tears, no fuss. Hooray!